Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel, and we continue with Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. So we are in chapter 49c, and this one's called Vanity. Hallelu et Adonai kol goyim shabechu kol ha'umim, ki gavar alenu chasdo ve'emet Adonai le'olam hallelujah. In all things, the Holy One, blessed be He, exacts His will. Against the mighty, He sends the lowly, to show them that their power is nothing. Like we saw in last class, it was Esther's prayers that cut Haman down to size, putting him in the ground after swinging from the tree that he prepared for Mordechai. And to add insult to injury, Achashverosh gave her his house. Titus the wicked entered into the Holy of Holies and said, "No oppressor or enemy can stand before me." So like we said, the oppressor is Esav and the enemy is Ishmael. And the text here in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is ironically using this description for the man who at least falls into the category of oppressor, right? Tsar ve'oyev, Esav, Ishmael. And in other of the prophets, you're going to see tsar ve'oyev of specific individuals, particularly the king of Assyria is tsar ve'oyev, oppressor and an enemy. This is not a good thing. What did the Holy One, blessed be He, do? He sent a single mosquito into his nose. In Hebrew, it's yatush. In English, it's like a gnat or something, even smaller than mosquito, but in Hebrew it's called yatush. So we'll go with mosquito or a gnat. He sent a single mosquito into his nose, ascended through his nasal cavity until it reached his brain, when it grew to be the size of a 2-pound dove, to show that his strength was meaningless. You can find this story in the Talmud, in Midrash Rabbah, and in Avot de Rabbi Natan. If you just want to Google it or something, you can Google it Titus mosquito nose or one of those things, and it'll actually show you this account. The long and the short of it is that the tiny little mosquito, or gnat, was busy inside his brain, nonstop. It was buzzing over there for weeks, and it drove him mad to the point where he cracked his own head against the wall to get it to stop, splitting it in the process. When the physicians looked inside, they saw what was there and actually weighed it out, which is how we got to that measurement. It was like, massive. No one is above this kind of recompense, not even Israel. When Israel entered into the Holy of Holies with prideful hearts, and would say, "No oppressor or enemy, tsar ve'oyev, can stand before us," now our sages obviously clarify this is not all of Israel, but the one man who represents them, which is the high priest. Nobody else from Israel, not even the other priests, can enter there. Only the high priest into the Holy of Holies once a year on Yom Kippur. That's it. So this is mentioned in Ezekiel 26. We'll start with 21. "Say to the house of Israel, so says the Lord, behold, I am profaning my sanctuary." God is doing this to his own sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, right? "The pride of your strength." You think that this is going to protect you because it's holy to me? Wait. "The desire of your eyes and the yearning of your soul and your sons and daughters whom you have left over will fall by the sword. And you shall do as I have done. You shall not enwrap yourselves over your upper lip, and you shall not eat the bread of men, and your glory shall be on your heads and your shoes on your feet. You shall neither lament nor weep, and you will melt because of your iniquities, and you will moan one to another." Some other place it says breaking the pride of their strength. Geonuschem, those are the exact words used in, Leviticus 26, when you come to the land and you think, oh, it's all good, look what I did, look what I conquered, and you rely on the pride of your strength, that's when God is going to send the filthy animals against you, like we've been teaching for the past, 500 plus days. So this, of course, is speaking of the Babylonian exile, when he's speaking to Ezekiel, who was part of the Babylonian exile, and the pride of Israel, who believed that God would not allow his own house to be destroyed, though Israel were living in sin. It doesn't work like that. Meaning, even the first temple is at the end of the day, it's just a place, right? A thing that was built and can be destroyed, and was. Now, this is not to say that it was not holy. This is not to say that God is mentioning it and God is lifting it up, not to say that there's not going to be a third temple. Of course, there is. We have the designs for it from Ezekiel. So it is a holy place, but God is saying just because something is holy and I deem it holy, doesn't mean that you get to do whatever you want. There are rules here. And if you disobey those rules, and if you profane my holy place, it's not going to stop the ways of recompense, the ways of the world working, the way God set up the universe. To put your faith in anyone or anything other than in God himself, this is a very costly mistake. Our text continues. What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He sent the evil Nebuchadnezzar upon them, who oppressed them, and was prideful himself, to announce, as said in 1 Samuel 2:9, by the way, who was Nebuchadnezzar? He was from the descendants of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. That's right. Some unions should never happen, but that's where it came from, and that's why God gave him the authority to go destroy something that his forefather built. Also, they were somewhat similar as far as they could both talk to the animals, and Nebuchadnezzar was the king of the entire earth, just like Solomon. That's not here. I think we discussed it in plenty early teachings. In other words, only if you come from something can you go back and destroy it. So, like we said, what did God do? He sent Nebuchadnezzar, as said in 1 Samuel 2:9, the feet of his pious ones will guard, and the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, for not by strength will man prevail. Who said this? Who said this? This was from the prayer of Hannah. We're going to touch on this later on. Just amazing stuff. When the temple was destroyed, they couldn't believe it. Not the nations, and certainly not Israel. As said in Lamentations 4:12. The kings of the earth did not believe, nor all the inhabitants of the world, that an oppressor or enemy, tsar ve'oyev, there it is again, could enter the gates of Jerusalem. As far as the pride of Nebuchadnezzar, it says of him in Daniel 5:20, and when his heart became haughty, and his spirit was toughened, so that he dealt wickedly, he was disposed from his royal throne, and the honor was removed from him. Now, if you walk around with pride, believing in your own strength, you are essentially drawing a massive target on your back, leaving yourself open to be humbled and humiliated. And that's the best case scenario. That means God still wants you around, okay, to do a tikkun. It's not going to be pretty, but you're going to have to take that medicine. Rabbi Chanichai says, the Holy One, blessed be he, set no limit to the kingdoms except to the Egyptian bondage, as said in Genesis 5:13. And he said to Abram, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. We actually have a date over here. When rabbinical text speaks of kingdoms, they are referring to the kingdoms that concern us, not who cares what's happening in the rest of the world? It's not relevant to us. So particularly when it comes also to our exile. So remember, it started with Egypt, which was the prototype. And then what are we talking about? We're talking about Egypt, Babylon, the Medo-Persia exile, Greece, Rome, and Ishmael. So in this case, we have an actual time limit in the simple text in the Torah, 400 years. And the Holy One, blessed be he, acted with great mercy and kindness with them. Isaiah 63:7-8 says, the kind acts of the Lord I will mention, and praises of the Lord, according to all that the Lord bestowed upon us, and much good to the house of Israel, which he bestowed upon them, according to his mercies and according to his many kind acts. So though there was that 400 years, even though it wasn't 400, we've already been through that, we just saw God's kindness all throughout. And he said, they are but my people, children who will not deal falsely. And he became their savior, because he did. Like we just read in the splitting the sea, when Moses told them, be still and see the salvation of the Lord. And speaking of Moses, the chosen redeemer, God's messenger, in all their troubles, he was troubled, and the angel of his presence saved them. With his love and with his pity, he redeemed them, and he bore them, and he carried them all the days of old. Meaning, what are the days of old? Before the giving of the Torah. And so, the word that is always translated as angel in Hebrew is malach. But like we said, it also means emissaries or messengers. Meaning, you can read it both ways and they're both correct. So God sent his messenger before him, and that was Moses. Like in Genesis 32:4, Jacob sent angels, Vaishlach Yaakov malachim. It could say messengers. Here, then this translation says angels. Sure. Ahead of him to his brother Esav, to the land of Seir, to the field of Edom. So back to our story. The presence of God, which is another reason he is referred to as Hamakom, the place, the spot, the void, meaning he fills everything, fills the universe. The presence, this is also the Shekhinah. And we've learned that Moses was married to the Shekhinah as he built the Mishkan Shekhinah, dwelling place for the Shekhinah itself, that never left Moses, hence Umalach Panav, the angel emissary of his presence or face, Panim. So we can also see this in Exodus 33:11. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man. Ka'asher ke. Whenever it's like this, it doesn't mean that God has no image, obviously. I have to explain it here because I know some of the people watching think, oh, well, surely he does. He looks just like us. No, he does not. The Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man would speak to his companion, and he would return to the camp, but his attendant Joshua, the son of Nun, a lad, would not depart from the tent. And no, Moses did not see God's face, because God has no form, let alone a face to see. And like we say later on, show me you can't, no man can see me and live, right? Okay. But rather, the word face, panim, is exactly the same word for internal, panim, as in the essence of. Moses spoke directly to the essence of God, and the essence of God spoke directly to Moses. You understand? There was that, I don't want to call it bond, but there was that understanding. There was binah. That's where Moses was at. How do we behold the essence of God? Only through the Torah. The Torah was given from binah, from understanding, supernal understanding. That's why Moses is called currently Rabbeinu. Not Rabbi this or Rabbi that or Rabbi this or Rabbi that, but Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu, our current rabbi. And no one else holds this title. So, and the Holy One, blessed be He, acted with great mercy and kindness with them, and He shortened it almost in half to 210 years, from 400 to 210. You may be asking, well, we know that though they were in Egypt for 210 out of the 400 years allotted, but they only actually suffered for 86 years. And so I will tell you what most Jews today do not understand. When Israel is not in the land of Israel, you have no idea what it does in the heavens. Things are not right. Things are not as they should be. Things are out of order. Lo beseder. That's why on Pesach we have a seder. Seder literally means order. The night of order. When Jews are not in Israel, the world is out of order. So yes, everything that is going on right now, that's on us. So it prohibits us from fulfilling the commandments of the Torah, and we also delay the redemption as a result. So Egypt was the first timeline, and here's another. And for the Babylonian kingdom, 70 years. As said in Jeremiah 29:10, again, we got numbers. For so said the Lord, for at the completion of 70 years in Babylon, I will remember you, and I will fulfill my good word to you to restore you to this place, back to Israel. It's a good thing. Restore you. When you're not, that's not good, right? Okay. That was the issue with the kings of Babylon and Persia. They miscalculated the times of the exile. They knew because of the prophecy it was 70 years, but they didn't know exactly when to start counting. Just like the Ephraimites, who left Egypt 30 years early because they miscalculated when the 400 years began. I just read in a Midrash who was the one that actually led them out. It was Nun, the father of Joshua. Joshua, the son of Nun. Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim, said, "The Lord has spoken to me and told me that we have to go out right now." What happened? 200,000 of them got slaughtered because the Lord told him. Obviously, no, he didn't, and that's what happens. Let that be a warning. So, here we're going to break down the timeline of the Babylonian exile. Rabbi Abahu says, Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years. Know that it is true. Come and see. On the first year of his reign, he ascended to Jerusalem and conquered Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, as said in Daniel 1:1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, if you don't know the history, the Babylonians didn't destroy the temple right away. There were this happened 2 kings later. And this is where the miscalculation started when it comes to the 70-year Babylonian exile. 8 years he, Nebuchadnezzar, reigned over the kingdom of Jehoiakim. In other words, he was still there. Though he was a puppet king, he was still a king of Judah, right? Once he was done, the next king of Judah replaced him. 11 years he reigned over Zedekiah's kingdom. There was another one in between, but we're going to talk about in a second. And that was a total of 19 years until the temple was destroyed. Okay? And then from the day the temple was destroyed, another 26 years he reigned. So these are the 45 years of his reign, as our text continues. Know that this is true, come and see. From the exile of Jehoiachin, there's Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, this is Jehoiachin, who only reigned 3 months. You see? So it's just 3 months. So he's in between that timeline over there. In between Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin, until the reign of Evil-Merodach, Nebuchadnezzar's son, it was 37 years, as said in 2 Kings 25:27. And it was in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that it's so funny because Evil-Merodach, it looks like evil Marduk. Evil Marmaduke, Evil-Merodach, king of Babylonia, in the year of his coronation, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and released him from prison. Rabbi Yonatan says, the end of the Medo-Persian kings was Artaxerxes, king of Babylon. Who was this king? Our sages say that this was Achashverosh from Esther 1:1. Artaxerxes, you'll probably Artaxerxes, or however you translate it there. Now it came to pass in the days of Achashverosh. He was the Achashverosh who reigned from Hodu to Cush, 127 provinces. So, this was a new reign. And who was this guy? He was not of royal blood, but his wife was. And I'm not talking about Esther, I'm talking about Vashti. Who was Nebuchadnezzar's son? Belshazzar, right? We can see the story in Daniel chapter 5, where he, like those who came before him, believed that the prophecy had passed, and those who came after him too. And the Jews were not going back to Israel. He miscalculated the 70-year exile, which is why he brazenly brought out the holy temple vessels on display. Then the golden vessels that had been this is 5:3. Daniel 5:3. Then the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, were brought, and the king, his dignitaries, his queen, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised gods of gold, silver, copper, iron, wood, and stone. At that time, the fingers of a human hand emerged and wrote opposite the candelabrum on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. And what was written there in Aramaic? And this is what the writing that was inscribed. Mene, mene, tekel, ufarsin. This is the interpretation they called Daniel, right? To interpret this. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, to count. Limnot is to count. Mene, God has counted your kingdom and has brought it to an end. Tekel, you were weighed on the scales and found wanting. The scales are called b'mozniya. Moznaim. Moznaim, balances. That's what we call scale. And also oznaim, which gives you your inner balance, right? I had, what was it? That inner ear thing. I kept on, for goodness sakes, I can't remember it. But I had it. It sucked, but I got over it. Anyway, yeah, your ears are what balance you. Ufarsin, your kingdom has been broken up and given to Media and Persia. And what happened later that same night? On that night, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was assassinated. And granted, everybody that was in that party. Okay. The Midrash says that when the Persians raided the palace, they found the king's daughter, who was Vashti, little girl Vashti. And they took her captive only later to be given as queen to Artaxerxes, Achashverosh, who she despised because he was not of royal blood, and she was. And for how long did he reign? He reigned for 32 years, as said in Nehemiah 13:6. Now with all this, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes, one and the same, the king of Babylon, I came to the king, and after some days I requested of the king. If you don't know this, from the time Cyrus sent back the Jews to Israel to build the temple, and the time it was completed, took around 18 years. In between the time, you have Ezra, you have Nehemiah, you have Esther, and you even have Daniel. He was mentioned by a different name in there. We'll talk about that in upcoming teachings. So now, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, the name just keeps driving me crazy in my head. Vertigo. Thank you. Good Lord. Vertigo. So now, let's get into Achashverosh's wealth and status. Rabbi Tanchum says, come and see the wealth of Achashverosh, who was wealthier than all the kings of Mede and Persia, for of him it is said in Daniel 11:2. And now I should tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th will become wealthy with great wealth. And when he becomes strong with his wealth, he will arouse all against the kingdom of Greece. Also, another piece of information that you should know: all the kings of Babylon and the Medo-Persia ruled from Babylon, except for Achashverosh. So they might have been kings from Mede or from Persia, but they were considered Babylonian kings because they ruled from Babylon. That was the center of the ancient world at the time. Except for Achashverosh. He had his craftsmen, who were based in Shushan, recreate the throne of Solomon, which is an architectural marvel and anomaly within itself. And since it was so large and so heavy, it could not be moved. It filled up almost the entire room. So he decided to build his palace around the throne in the city of Shushan, making that now the capital of his kingdom. In 1 Kings 10:18-20, we have a simple description of Solomon's legendary throne. Though if you read the Midrash, you'll see that these golden lions that were over here, they were acting bodyguards for whoever attempted to ascend other than Solomon himself would get thrashed. We'll read this for a second. And the king made, this is Solomon's throne. And the king made an immense ivory throne and overlaid it with glittering gold. There were 6 steps to the throne, and on the top of the throne was circular from behind, and there were arms on both sides by the place of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside the arms. And 12 lions stood there on the 6 steps, on one side and on the other. No such throne was made for any kingdom. End of story, right? And Achashverosh was a bit obsessed with King Solomon. He's trying to, one-up him, as he was the wealthiest king in the ancient world before him. And so it says in the Midrash, it's interesting. It's like the steps were hands. You had to step on one, and then it moved you in a certain direction. In other words, it was like a sequence, a code, but it always changed. And only Solomon, with his wisdom, could figure out that puzzle, making it up there to the throne. I forgot which story it was of which other king tried to ascend his throne, and the lion just killed him. But in any case, fun stuff. And so, we're back to our text. And so what was the wealth of Achashverosh? He would place beds or couches. It says mitot. Mitah is, in modern day Hebrew, is a bed, but it could also be a couch. Beds or couches of silver and gold in the city streets. So let's just clarify here. The word in Hebrew is rechov, street, and it is singular. It didn't say rechovot. So it says rechov, meaning this was not just a street, but rather this comes from rechava, meaning a wide open space like a square, Rechava is where, in Israel they would hold like massive memorial services or things like that, a massive open square, right? So that's called Rechava. Rechava, Rechov, they're one, Rachav, wide. Okay. So this, according to the Radal, is a reference to his palace gardens, which took up a massive amount of space. Again, it was like his entire city was his palace, right? And why did the palace beds or couches of silver and gold, why did he place them throughout the gardens? Our text says, to display his wealth to the entire world. He wanted to do this. As we read in Daniel, and the fourth one will become wealthy with great wealth. And as said in Esther 1:6, there were spreads of white, fine cotton, and blue embroidered with cords of linen and purple on silver rods and marble columns, couches, there we go, mitot, of gold and silver on a pavement of green, white, shell, and onyx marble. They were walking on jewels. So think if you were walking through Central Park, right? And every park bench was made of gold and silver, and the pathways were actually all the fine jewels. That's all it was over there. And it gets better. And all the vessels used by Achashverosh were not vessels of silver, but vessels of gold, exclusively. We spoke before of the obsession regarding the throne, regarding Solomon. Our sages actually confirmed this. And now he's trying to do the same thing. From 1 Kings 10:21, the very next verse after the description of the throne. And all of the king's drinking vessels, this is Solomon, were gold. And all the utensils of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. What is the forest of Lebanon? This was before, I know, I have this question myself, but basically Solomon's throne room, it was called the forest of Lebanon. Why? Because you had massive columns, hundreds of them, to hold up this massive hall. They didn't have the arch technology, which came like 1,000 years later, or 500 years later. They didn't have that tech yet, right? So then they needed columns all throughout. And he painted it like trees, so it actually looked like a forest. His throne room looked like a forest. And what's the question that comes up? Well, with all his wisdom, did he not know about the arch to be, right? Okay, not relevant for the time, but still an interesting question nonetheless. Sorry, I don't have an answer for you. Now, this is where Achashverosh overstepped. So this is the forests of Lebanon. They were pure gold. None was silver, since it was reckoned with as nothing in the days of Solomon. Silver was reckoned as nothing in the days of Solomon. So here comes Achashverosh, and he would bring out the temple vessels to put them on display for all to see. And the vessels of Achashverosh's house, would change into lead. His gold vessels would change into lead, as said in Esther 1:7. And they gave them to drink in golden vessels, and the vessels differed from one another, and royal wine was plentiful according to the bounty of the king. Now, we got to read this in Hebrew. V'hashkot bichlei zahav, they gave them, lashkot is to pour, to water, right? In the golden vessels, v'kelim mikilim shonim, and vessels mikilim shonim. The word shonim, yes, it is different, but it is also from the word mishtanim, morphing, changing. In other words, something happened to these gold vessels that would change. So you've heard of the alchemist, right? Turning lead into gold. Mess with the holy vessels of the temple, and your gold turns into lead. Now, I learned this years ago. The moment that the guests at his 180-day party, which we're going to be discussing next week, would drink from gold cups, it turned into lead while the wine was still in. In other words, they could have one sip from the gold, and then it already turned into lead, and they had to throw out the gold goblet, and then take another one. And this happened again. Almost the entire city was at his party, and people were just tossing out gold, or rather, it was turning into lead, right? Also showing how much disposable gold he had. But this was obviously a punishment, and we'll get into that shortly too. All the floors of his palace consisted of precious stones and pearls, as said in Esther 1:6, on a pavement of green, white, shell, and onyx marble. Now, back to the comparison with King Solomon. There are rich people and there are wealthy people. Yes? Even today, right? A rich person wears their wealth. Gold chains, designer labels, right? As has been our culture since the 80s. Also, they buy very expensive cars, boats, planes, houses, you name it. And then they, of course, they make a very big fuss about it because they want to make a point of showing just how rich they are. But it's the really wealthy guys, the ones who view money differently, who don't try so hard because they don't have to. Warren Buffett, for instance, has lived in the same house since 1958 at a value of $31,500. No joke. He's worth $149 billion. And he lives in that same humble home. For comparison, you got Jeff Bezos, has a real estate portfolio of almost $600 million. He's got a net worth of $241 billion. Just so you understand the difference of mentality. Our commentator, Velo Dela, says that as wealthy as Ahasuerus was, and make no mistake, he absolutely was loaded, it didn't even come close to the wealth of Solomon. Ahasuerus was trying to show his money to the world. MTV Cribs and whatnot, right? While Solomon couldn't help it. I'll explain. The difference is that Solomon knew the value of gold and silver and precious stones, while the Persian, we'll just call him that, didn't. In the days of Solomon, there were bars of silver, perfectly cut bars of silver in the streets. Not because he was flaunting it, but because his storehouses were full of gold, that there was no place left to keep the treasure. But Ahasuerus emptied his vaults and put everything in the street on full display. That's the difference, full display or overflowing. In his days, people could and would steal gold and silver from the couches and the beds. But in Solomon's day, because think about it, if that, you have a golden bench in what do you call it in Central Park. In Central Park, you think it'll last there for more than 20 minutes? Not even, right? But in Solomon's day, there was so much abundance that no one needed to steal silver. It was nothing in his day. I got silver, right? And even if they wanted to, the treasure was so big and heavy that they couldn't, but they didn't need to. Because in Solomon's days, silver were not crafted into anything but bars. So in other words, they couldn't break off the pieces of the bench and take it, right? And why silver and not gold? Because the gold Solomon received, was holy, collected by his father David for the purpose of God's temple and his vessels. Even what this is going to, it makes it holy because of where it goes to, because of its intent. And this is how God made sure to make it a point to show the Persian that he was no match for the son of David. It was God who put it in his heart, in Ahasuerus' heart, to bring out God's temple vessels. Does this offend God? No. How dare you? Do it. See what happens. Showing that his gold is like lead compared to the gold of God. It was God himself who said in Haggai 2:8, "The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, says the Lord of hosts." All this to prove to Ahasuerus and the rest of the world that the gold that King Solomon used to build the house of God is holy. And since his vaults and storehouses overflowed with God's abundance, since Solomon was king not over just 127 states or provinces, but the entire world, as decreed by God himself, everything flowed out to the streets for all to see, for God's namesake. Did Solomon ask to be rich? No. He said, give me wisdom so I could judge your people. God said, because you asked this, I'm going to give you everything. If we understood that every penny we gain or lose comes from God, we would look at money very differently. People looking at money like, oh, yes, no, it's not. It all comes from there. And it has been decreed already by Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur what your year is going to look like. So, for instance, if God forbid, you have these big expenses you got to pay out, or you just gained a lot of money and you get robbed or something, that's to cover something else. You understand? It was God gave it to you so he could take it away from you and not punish you instead of that, because money comes and money goes, and God is in charge of all of it. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the wealthiest people in the world at their time, in their own right, but they didn't care. The proof is how they lived when Abraham was poor and on the run, or the Elon Musk 1,000 times over of the ancient world. He remained the same guy. He wasn't changed by money. As the generations went on, obviously weakness naturally set in. No one's like the patriarchs, right? This is also why the wealthiest king to have ever lived, in the beginning and in the end of his book of Ecclesiastes, tells us, "Vanity of vanities," said Kohelet. All is vanity. And this man speaks from experience. I learned this as a kid. A lot of the reasons that Solomon did everything that he did with all the wealth was to actually show the world that it is meaningless. Read that book. It will break your heart. It will humble you. As it did him, that's why he wrote that book. Remember, there is no power in this world except from God. None. As Hannah, the mother of Samuel, the anointer of kings, so beautifully prayed. She got it. That's why she got Samuel. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord impoverishes and makes rich. He humbles. He also exalts. Everything. He lifts the poor from the dust, from the dunghill. He raises the pauper to seat them with princes, and a seat of honor he causes them to inherit. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he placed the world upon them. The feet of his pious, raglei chasidav, he will guard, and the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by strength will man prevail. This is what we read in the beginning of the drash. Those who strive with the Lord will be broken, make no mistake. Upon him will he thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will grant strength to his king and raise the horn of his anointed one. Vanity of vanities, my friend. All is vanity. And that's our class. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time. So have a wonderful rest of the week and have a Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.